everyone, and thanks for listening to the Quality Hub, chatting with ISO experts. I'm your host, Xavier Francis, and today I'm here with BS Squared, or two Brians. Brian Smith, who is director of our consulting services, and Brian Smotko, consultant, and they are both here from Core Business Solutions. Glad you both could be with us, and I think that'll be probably the last BS joke that we have today.
Good to be here.
All right.
Yeah, nice to be with you.
I think we had you guys on before, but never together. This week's podcast, we're going to be talking about change management and clause 6.3 of ISO 9001. But before we begin, let's hear from both our Brians as they tell us a little bit about their experiences and journeys. And let's start with Mr. Smith.
Well, I've been here now going on 6 years, I guess, with Core.
Oh, full-time. Yeah,
full-time. I was a contractor before that. So I got my ISO experience in the Federal Bureau of Prisons as an employee.
So you weren't a guest?
No. I got to always make sure to point that out.
Yes, as an employee.
So yeah, I said that to a customer group at a customer's one time. Their eyes lit up, and I had to explain now.
Yes.
So yeah, I was in prison industries, and we had to have ISO to deal with the military and some of our customers. So had a long experience with that, and as a factory manager, quality manager, and being an administrator here, I've had a lot of experience managing change correctly and incorrectly, and I've seen the results of both.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're here to talk about it today and share some of your experiences and expertise. What about you, Mr. Smotko?
So I've been with Core it's going my second year now with Core. My history, I spent 5 years in the Marine Corps. I then worked, surprisingly enough, 20 years for the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections.
As an employee.
As an employee, yes.
Okay.
And then through that function, I was involved heavily with occupational health and safety. When I retired from the Department of Corrections, I went back to school and became a machinist, where I started working in machine shops.
Okay.
Then I got involved with programming, and then I started getting involved into the quality side of businesses. And then I met Core.
Awesome. That's great. Well, you may have heard the word Smotko before. Your better half or significant other, however you want to refer to her, is Suzanne Weber Smotko, who's been on this podcast quite a bit as well. So glad you're here. I really appreciate your experience. And I guess we'll get started. I'm going to first start by diving in and reading Clause 6.3. And it states, planning of changes. When the organization determines the need for changes to the quality management system, or QMS, the changes shall be carried out in a planned manner. The organization shall consider A, the purpose of the changes and their potential consequences, B, the integrity of the quality management system, C, the availability of resources, and D, the allocation or reallocation of responsibilities and authorities. So we're going to start with Smotko. From a high level, what does that mean?
Well, the standard, what they're talking about there in 6.3 is the standard is telling us that they want to see change carried out in a planned manner. And when you read that section of the standard, it refers to your quality management system. So your quality management system, you should define, it would be your processes, the things that you measure, the resources that are necessary to achieve intended results. And to further that, the standard in 6.3 refers you to C4.4, right? Because 4.4 in the standard for processes gives us the direction of what it wants to see documented when it comes to change, what it affects and how it affects our quality management system.
It also talks about everything and how your quality management system runs. Am I correct?
Absolutely correct.
So your inputs, your outputs, your methods, on, and what you do to establish your QMS. So since 6.3 also says the integrity of the quality management system, I guess we're going to have to look at everything that goes into it and go back to those, right?
Correct. The changes to the processes that you have, changes that could affect the intended results of your processes, procedure changes, equipment changes, material changes, changes of downstream vendors. The standard wants you to manage change so that it does not affect your ability to fulfill current obligations, and for you to consider things such as potential consequences, the integrity of the management system, resources and responsibilities and authorities. They're looking for you to cover all those bases. So at the end of the day, we have no unintended consequences from the change that we incorporate.
Okay. Well, that's a lot to consider, and it's really important. You really want to make sure that change goes well and doesn't have, oops, we didn't think that through. So, Mr. Smith, how does Core approach this particular clause of the standard?
So, 6.3 is intended for planned and pretty major changes. you have minor changes that come up periodically within production or within operations. And there's another spot in the standard that addresses that. But 6.3, you really want to address this in management review. And the management review requirements don't necessarily call out plan changes.
Okay.
But we have an agenda. Core made an agenda that expands a little bit on the 9001 requirements for management review and changes as part of one of our line items.
So could you elaborate like a little bit on what might be discussed and steps that might take in a management review when a planned big change is going to happen? What would you suggest we look at that would be a planned change?
Addition of new equipment.
Yeah, I was going to iterate to what Mr. Smotko said earlier. That equipment, material, process, procedural, it's a lot easier to manage this stuff when you get ahead of it.
Mm-hmm.
And having some experience in, the area of manufacturing or services that you're providing is a bonus because you've probably been through some of this before. But you'd be surprised how changes happen without planning, without consideration of what can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And you get out over your skis, and next thing you know, it's detrimental to the entire operation.
Right.
So if let's take, for example, a new piece of equipment. If that's the plan, you're doing your capital planning and it gets approved at the end of this year, immediately you should be looking at infrastructure, personnel, resources, all these things, safety hazards, environmental hazards, regulatory changes. All these things need to be considered before you bring that thing into the floor.
Right.
How's it could it cause a bottleneck? You're bringing in another machine to increase your production.
Right.
Is it going to do that, or is it going to bottleneck everything? I've seen that happen.
Yeah. Even space. Maybe you don't have enough space for it, or it's bigger than you intend, or going to need more bodies than you might realize that take space to do it. So that's all should be talked about in management review. In theory, your management review has most everybody that's going to be leadership from different departments, and they're going to have some say of what they're going to take and consider this change is going to, how that change is going to affect them.
Management review is not just an ISO thing.
Right.
When your leadership and top management gets together to discuss things, it's management review.
Right.
You might only be hitting one line item like this change, but it needs to be discussed and things need to be considered before the trigger gets pulled.
Right. And that's what the change management in 6.3 is talking about. Management review is a great place to do it. Now, Smotko, how does Clause 6.3 align with the overall goal of maintaining consistency and quality in processes during the organizational changes? We talked about it a little bit, but really getting into the nuts and bolts of consistency and the quality.
Well, the standard in 6.3 expects organizations to implement change in a planned manner. And so the standard's intent is to identify any potential consequences to mitigate the risks and maintain the integrity of the quality management system when dealing with that change. Now, if there's a reallocation or allocation of responsibilities or authorities with any change, again, the standard requires that you address it to ensure a smooth integration into your current processes.
Okay, so let's take an example. Let's say, similar to what we talked about just a minute ago, we're going to make a change in your manufacturing and you're going to add a second new product line. You need to make sure that everything that is going to need to be done to make that change is reviewed, and then you make sure the resources, responsibilities, and authorities are planned and thought out. Could you give us a little example what might pop up, if you will, when something like this may happen? Mr. Smith discussed that, you want to talk about it in management review. What might pop up, though? What else might come in line?
If it were me incorporating the change, the first thing I would consider in bringing in new equipment is, one, do I have people to run that equipment?
Okay.
Do I have the knowledge and expertise on hand to ensure that I can provide a proper product or service, whatever it is the company is into, to ensure that, again, we have knowledgeable people providing expert skills. And then we want to make sure that, again, do I need to have written work instructions? Are there any space availability in the facilities that I'm at? Do I have work instructions for my people to follow so that they can, again, conformity of products, right? Because
training on the equipment.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, training awareness is some of the bigger key factors in companies to ensure that your people are confident in the things that they do, right? The standard expects competence. It looks for competent people, and it expects companies to ensure that the people that they have put in these changes are competent to, one, either carry out the change or run the new machine or monitor the process, whichever the case could be.
And that's bigger than just, hey, here's the manual, read it.
No, absolutely.
Because we actually did talk about education and training for people. Everybody learns differently. So that manual might just be, okay. Could somebody show me what that means? Because manuals aren't always clear, and engineers aren't always people that are running the machines. So you have to look at that as well.
Absolutely. When you take change into consideration, the standard is asking you if you're making a change to something that has the ability to affect your ability to meet the customer's requirements, right? So if I'm adding a product line, that change has to be spot on from the moment it starts to the day ends, right? Because there's no room in someone's schedule for let's run it again or let's take that to scrap, because now you're raising your scrap rates. So again, you want to make sure that, as you make the change, education and training is a priority, documentation, space availability. And again, you want to look for some of the pitfalls, like, for example, resistance to change, right? Employees that have been there 25 years may not be too happy about trying to learn a new process or a new machine. Mm-hmm. So you have to find ways as an organization to incorporate that change to those folks so they see the benefit of it, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about the benefit of the company and meeting customers' requirements.
Exactly. Now, digging a little deeper, Mr. Smith, what steps should be followed to assess the potential impact of plan changes on the QMS?
Well, it varies from organization to organization, and you really got to customize them for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And probably based on what you're doing, what that change is as well.
Yeah, but they can be pretty universal. You want a universal, set of steps. Mm-hmm. And we mentioned CORE before. We do have a change management form in CORE that can be used. I used that years ago in Federal Prison Industries. The safety standard, it is required for documented change management. So, but I expanded it into environmental and operational. Mm-hmm. And it's a good list. So our big picture risks.
Okay. What might those be?
Well, your established risks that you came up with in the context of your organization. First thing you want to look at, is this going to improve and mitigate that risk, or could it compound it?
Right.
You want to take a look there. Identify the interested parties, right? That's kind of a broad term, but what group and what individuals is this going to affect, or who is going to perceive that they're affected by this?
Okay. It might be more than just a person on the floor. If we use the example of a second product line, it could be suppliers.
Absolutely.
It could be regulatory.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're now working with another metal or some other product that has something in it, lithium. Oh, wait a minute, there's things on that, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. The first time I used this change management tool, the form approach, I was going to move a machine into another building, and crane costs alone were about $10,000 one way.
Wow.
And I was going to lose around a week's worth of production, but we thought it was a great idea. It was going to cut down on some bottlenecks and make our flow better. But we took a look at some things before we pulled the trigger, and we would have created a hearing hazard. Mm. We would have had to have a hearing program, which we didn't. We weren't at that level at that time, which is very costly. And I would have ended up moving that machine back where it was. So that would have been another $10,000 in cranes and another week lost.
Wow.
So that was one of the first times I took a methodical approach to change. And of course, I was a born again believer at that point, because that saved me a lot of embarrassment and a lot of money.
Yeah, right? I'm sure it did.
Yeah. So, if you don't plan your changes, it's going to end up costing you money and efficiency. It's going to
maybe your quality.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we talked about interested parties. Who's this going to affect? And your other processes. Don't, like we said, we're putting another machine in. How is this going to affect other processes? Can the downstream of that machine handle what it's putting out? Or is it all shipping can do to ship the stuff that we're making with the machines that we have? Mm-hmm. So look at upstream, the inputs, and downstream, the outputs from this area of change, and see if they can handle it.
Maybe even electricity. Can we run the two lines at the same time?
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Infrastructure is a big part of it. And that's the one thing that I think I've seen companies, most of them do focus on that. They're really aware, and maintenance gets involved in these. And those guys know if there's going to be an infrastructure problem.
Yeah.
Now, whether we listen to them or not, that's another thing. because sometimes we'll get accused of not doing that. We talked about downstream from the machine or the process, but way downstream to the customer.
Yeah.
This is probably intended for an improvement and a customer satisfaction improvement or efficiency. So, but that's a good point, though. The positives too, not the change doesn't have to be negative.
Risk and opportunities.
Right. That's what we focus on, because that's what's going to be costly. Then it becomes down to roles and responsibilities and communicating them. That's probably the key thing, is identifying who's responsible and accountable for what, and how are we going to communicate that to those people, and how they're going to communicate back to us, so it's a two-way conversation. Because the folks that are out there turning the screws and running those machines are going to see problems way before management does.
Right.
And we got to listen to them.
Yep.
And take into consideration everything that every concern they have.
Well, like Mr. Smocko said, buy-in. Do you have any points that you might want to also talk about that?
At the end of the day, the standard is written to ensure that companies have the ability to meet customers' expectations and requirements. The entire standard is written so that your company gets better, so that you don't miss a requirement or a deadline or something to your customer.
Right.
And so change has that ultimate ability when it comes to new equipment, for example, the bringing in a new line or a new product line, right? Like Brian was saying, if I have an inspection room and we're doing final inspection and I only have one person working that inspection room and I've just doubled the output of my production process, you need to look at how does it affect everything downstream? Do I have people in place to ensure that they're skilled and qualified to test those things, check those things, to give us the certainty that the outcomes are the intended outcomes that we'd expect?
Or even if you look at it from that perspective, you have the tools to test it. Do you have the people to test it? Do you have the space to test another thing?
Absolutely.
Dot.
Absolutely.
All of that. Well, that's all we have time for today. Make sure that you check in next week for part 2 of Change Management and Clause 6.3. We want to thank everyone who's listened to our podcast today, and we hope it's been informative for you. Now, if you're looking for more information about Core Business Solutions, how we can help you with ISO certification of cybersecurity, customized training, maybe even help you with how you're going to communicate some changes to people, please email us at info@thecoresolution.com. You can also visit our website at www.thecoresolution.com. And if you haven't already followed us on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube, be sure to do so, and that way you won't miss the next Quality Hub podcast when it's released next week. Have a great day, everyone.